All right, I'm going to describe the MRT system, the design storm that was used to design that system, give a little history, and talk about how it's changed over time. So in 20 minutes, I'm going to give you a breakdown of the whole MRT. Colonel Mitchell, I'm not going to mention that's 8 minutes longer than Colonel Baumgarten gave you, okay? So, all right, so I'm going to jump right in because I got a lot of slides, and I think this will be informative to you. As I mentioned, I told you what I'm going to tell you about. So we're talking about the Mississippi River Basin, obviously a large basin. 41% of the continental United States all flows to the little red area you see here. And that's what we're talking about, flood protection on the lower Mississippi River and how it's designed. Slide here, just take away from this is that on average, about 40% of the water that comes to the lower Mississippi River comes from the Missouri River and the upper Mississippi River, where 60% of that comes from the Ohio River. It's just a good slide to indicate that. All right, so the history of the MRT and where we're at now. I'm going to just flip through some history real quick and talk about some major events that's kind of shaped where we're at. So in 1879, the MRC Commission was established to look over the river, improve flood protection, navigation, and commerce on the river. 1927, we had a very big flood that really galvanized the way we look at flood control on the lower Mississippi River. A lot of lives lost, a lot of area inundated. The 1927 Act the 1927 flood spearheaded the 1928 Flood Control Act. And that is the authorization of the MRT system, basically. Many of you may know it as the Jadwin Plan. It really is when we got away from levees only. Instead of just looking at raising levees for flood protection, we looked at what we call room for the river. Some backwater areas, some floodways to pass the water to the Gulf safely. All right, so some other substantial things that's happened through the history. I'm building up to present time here, but basically we had a cutoff system. Cutoff system changed the river from Memphis down to Vicksburg. A lot of cutoffs improved flood control, dropped flood control heights 5 feet in some places. So that was a substantial thing that's happened over time. 1937 flood, another huge flood on the valley. The 1937 flood really led us to look at a PDF storm for the first time, and that was in the 1941 PDF storm. So between 1941 to 1955, we had some new data, we had some projects come online. I'll mention Kentucky Barkley came online at that time that really allowed us to operate the Ohio River for flood protection on the main stem, on the lower. So also a lot more data. A lot more data was database that we could look at. So we were asked by Congress to look at the PDF storm. And that's what I'm going to talk about here in detail in a minute. That is the storm that the current system is designed for. That was in 55. All right, so 1973, another huge flood in the valley, caused us to go back and look at that. Is the PDF storm still accurate? The stages that are produced by that PDF storm, do we still think those are accurate? Is our system designed still to pass that? 2011 flood, again, we made some changes in 73. 2011 flood made us look at it again. We passed 85. The flow we passed was about 85% of the PDF. Okay, so now that's what we're doing now. We're in a current assessment of the system again. All right, so just a good slide to show you how the system, all the water comes to the lower Mississippi Valley, obviously, large tributaries. Every storm is different. If you take, for example, in 2011, very huge flood on the Ohio River. The flood we just experienced in late 2015, early 2016, we had a lot of water, as Colonel Baumgarten mentioned earlier, in the upper Miss. So just a slide to tell you that every flood, we get everybody's water in the lower Mississippi River, obviously, and every flood is different. It may come maybe a small flood on the Red River, maybe a large. Just an indication of that. All right, so I built up the history. That's where we're at now. This is the storm that we use to design for the lower Mississippi River. So what we did was we have a 1937 storm, 1938 storm, and a 1950 storm, all right, and developed a hypothetical storm. That's what it's designed on. So basically, we took those storms, the Weather Service and the Corps, critically arranged those, and looked at all kind of different scenarios, and basically came up with what they thought was the biggest flood that had a reasonable probability of occurring. And that's what we have. It's a hypothetical storm with some tweaks of those 3 storms. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But again, when you take that storm, put it on the ground, there's 3 things that develop how you design to. All right, so you got the rainfall, which is the rainfall we're talking about here. You got how you route that rainfall. So how does it go through the reservoirs? How much of it infiltrates through the ground? So how much gets to the river? And then what are the stages that are produced from that? So with that in mind, all right, so we took our rainfall, looked how we routed it, and this is our project design flood. This is the piping diagram. So you can see, a large flood, as I mentioned, on the Ohio River. But basically, we have designed a system to pass these flows. Okay, so that's our project design flood, and I'm going to go into what that system is to pass that. All right, so I mentioned the rainfall, hypo flood 58A, EN. That's what it's referred to. So what does 58 mean? No technical meaning. Basically, the way I like to think of it is the Weather Bureau and the Corps listed a lot of alternatives, looked at different storms on a page. 58th combination is one they picked. No technical meaning. Later, they adjusted that a little bit. That's where the A comes from. So that's the rainfall part of it. And then we have EN. In the 1950s, the existing reservoirs we had on ground were used in the analysis. Okay, so that's the E, the existing. And then the N is the near future reservoirs. That's the ones that we thought were going to be built or were proposed to be built were included in that analysis. So again, that is what the MRT is designed to. All right, so I mentioned the 58AEN, but we looked at a lot of other storms. We looked at a lot of other storms that are heavy on the Missouri River, heavy on the Upper Miss, different storm combinations, and that's just what this is saying here, different times of the year. But 58AEN is a winter flood that basically happens between January through February. Each one of these storms that happened in the past, put them on top of each other 4 days apart, and that's how we developed our flows. So it's a winter storm that is used to design the MRT system. All right, just a good graphic of the rainfall amounts produced from it. As you can see, it's heavy on the Ohio River. That's what produced the most flow on the lower Mississippi River. And if you look back at when I mentioned in 2011, that would be true. 2011, we were very high on the Ohio River. All right, just the piping diagram, you can see a little bit better. You can see the features, pipes going everywhere, and I'm going to talk a little about each one of those very briefly, just to indicate how it's designed. All right, so we got floodways, we got backwater areas that are part of that room for the river I talked about. Like T27, before then, we designed with levees. Now we've got all kind of features, including tributary improvements, part of the MRT project. Big one that most of you may probably know about is Birch Point to Madrid. That's one of the biggest, our first line of defense on the lower Mississippi River. And that is after Kentucky Barkley. Kentucky Barkley is authorized to operate for a main stem Mississippi River flood. Okay, that is different than the Missouri River. Missouri River is obviously a big tributary to the Mississippi River. Got a large system of dams on the Missouri River, the largest dams in the Corps on the Missouri River. But it's not authorized to operate for a main stem flood. However, we do have a lot of incidental benefits that come from those dams. So we have the Missouri River, not authorized. Ohio River, Kentucky Barkley is authorized to operate for a main stem flood. So Kentucky Barkley, after that's really our first line of defense. And then the Birch Point to Madrid is our first floodway that's located just below Cairo. And then we have some backwater areas on the St. Francis River, the White River, Red River, and Yazoo River. Basically, a backwater area it's located on a tributary. When the Mississippi River is up, that tributary can't flow out. So that water backs up, spills over this levee into basically a bowl. Takes discharge off the main stem is the way it's operating. I got a picture here in a second that really indicates just how they operate. All right, so just a screenshot of Birch Point to Madrid if you're not familiar with it. If you can see the dark, that is the river. And basically, this is the only floodway that we explode. We will not let stages go over 61. In this area, when we explode this levee, water goes through this levee, into this floodway and eventually gets back into the river, but basically relieves stages, Cairo, Hickman, Kentucky areas along that stretch. That's the way it's designed to do. It's been operated twice. This is a graphic that better displays it. It's been operated twice, 37, not long after it was finished, and then it was again operated in 2011. So you can see, we blow it at the top, and we also blow it at the bottom. But again, that water gets out, comes around, eventually gets back into the river. Here's just an indication of the backwater areas. If you take the, I mentioned we have several backwater areas on several of our tributaries, but this is the Yazoo backwater area. This is in 2011. It's just a really good indication. You can see the high water. This is adjacent to the river on the right side. We did not overtop, but if we would have a little bit higher, obviously that water would have spilt over, and that's basically a storage area. The area is protected by the levee for normal floods, so it does a lot of benefit from, every year mediocre floods. But with the big one, it's designed to take water off of the main stem. All right, so some other features. The MRT system, we're getting down now to Louisiana. Many of you've probably heard of the old river control structure. That is actually not a flood control structure, but the purpose of that structure is to keep the Atchafalaya River from overtaking the Mississippi River. Basically, in 1950, it was determined that was the optimal distribution, that 70% of the water should go down the Mississippi River, 30% down the Atchafalaya River. So this structure was built, and it maintains that. So the way it works is we got the Red River coming down, and we got the Mississippi Main Stem River coming down. We add up those flows on a daily basis, and then we make sure that 70% is going down the Mississippi River, 30% is going down the Red River, and that's how it's operated. This is a good slide to indicate that. There's actually 3 structures there, but that's the summary. That's the simplification. That's what we're targeting, the 70-30 distribution, and again, that is just to make sure that the Mississippi River does not change course. All right, to Morganza Spillway, huge flood control feature on the MRT. Basically, this floodway is to make sure that we don't send more than 1.5 million CFS past Baton Rouge. The levees in Baton Rouge are designed for 1.5 million or low. So if we're exceeding that, we're going to open this. We're going to send water from the Mississippi River to the Atchafalaya River. It's just another design feature. Again, it's been operated twice, 1973 and 2011. Came very close just this past January. Very, very close to operating the structure. Just a good visual. You see the Mississippi River on the right. We have guide levees. When we open these gates, it takes water down to and gets in the Atchafalaya River. Just another screenshot on the left is high and dry when it's not in use. Right is when we open it up, the water goes through it. All right, Bonnet-Carré Spillway. This is located just above New Orleans, Louisiana. Same premises, same idea as the Morganza Spillway. We open it up, we're not going to let more than 1.25 million CFS go past New Orleans. That's what the levees are designed for. This has been operated often. It's been operated 11 times. 2016, it was operated. And just a key note is that when we're in a big flood, this one is always operated first because we always hit that 1.25 million trigger before we hit the 1.5. Just another really good visual. You can see the Mississippi River running on the bottom of this graphic. We divert, as the old river control structure in the Morganza, both divert water from the Mississippi River to the Atchafalaya River. This one sends water from the Mississippi River to the Lake Pontchartrain. So there's a lot of things that go in play when we operate this structure. Putting fresh water into a saltwater habitat, oyster beds in coastal Louisiana. There's a lot of things that have to be weighed. But again, when a large flood, it can be open to protect the city of New Orleans. All right, so I mentioned we are looking at this again. We've looked at it over time. We looked at it in 73 and now 2011. We're looking at it. What we're doing differently now a little bit is that in 73, we didn't look at the storm. All right, 2011, after the flood, we verified with coordination with the National Weather Service, that the PDF storm is still the storm we should be using, the 58A that I talked about. But because of the advancements in hydraulic modeling, runoff models, we can look at snow melt, infiltration rates, all that a lot better. We are going back and looking at the runoff. We can also have the ability to look at our dams more. And so now we're actually looking at the hydrology. That's a big difference than we did in 73. So we look at those changes, right? The hydrology. But the big thing we also look at is how's the river changed? Is the river silted in? You know, does the river still carry 1 million CFS at this stage? Or has it silted in and it carries 1 million CFS at a higher stage? Those are questions we can answer. You know, some of the discussions earlier about a RAS model. How are we able to do that? We have a RAS, which is just a hydraulic model of the entire lower Miss that we're able to put these flows in and look at what if scenarios. And I know that's where we're headed to on the upper Miss. So that's how we're able to do that. That's the assessment we're doing right now. And just a good graphic to show you why it may be different now. When I mentioned the AEN, the E is the existing reservoirs, the N was in the near future, right? So not all those were built, additional ones were built. So when you put all that same water on the ground, you get more water in the river. You may get more, you may get less, you get different water, different amounts of water. So that's why we're reassessing, just one of the reasons, but I think it's a good example of how the flow line can change. And I've mentioned this, but basically this is the difference in our new methodology that we're able to analyze now when looking at that storm. Very good graphic here. The blue is the 1927 flood, the 2011 flood because of the MRT system. You can see the difference in impacts, a lot different. No loss of life, whereas you had, I think, 250 and 27. Huge different footprint in the flooded acres. All right, that is the MRT system, and that is the design storm that used to design it. So I know I went through that quick, but looking forward to any questions on the system. Hey, Mike.
Mr. Windham?
Right. Yes.
I missed the very first part of your comments, but my understanding is that the 2011 flood, while it was a success, the actual flowage was 15% less than the stages that were observed were, which you mentioned about changing of the river condition. So if these new flow line studies come out and say that what we thought was a project elevation for all these levees, comes out that they need to be 18 inches higher. For us up here who have been hammered when the flood flow curves change and not allowed by the Corps to adjust those, it certainly seems unfair that anybody in the MRT not only will they be allowed to increase the levies, the federal government will do that. I understand it's a different process. I'm not going down that road.
Right.
But I'm just trying to pass on that we experience the same thing up here.
Right. Understood. And then, that's any river. It changes constantly. Rainfall patterns, as I mentioned, siltation. That's every river does that. Understood. And just one clarification on that. What I meant by the 85% is the 2011 was basically 85% of the project design flood. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Stages, upstream stages in particular, were pretty high for 85%.
Right. We had areas that, why were we higher than we thought? We have to go back and look at the reason why. Absolutely. No, ma'am. There's new ones since the original analysis in 1950 that we used to design the MRT system with. We used some assumptions we knew which ones we had that would be built or were proposed to be built in that time, and some of them were built, some of them were built, and then we've had some additional ones, built since then. Usually something else. There are reservoirs that are authorized underneath the MRT system. I think there's actually 5 that are authorized, and they were built at that time. And so most of the reservoirs I'm talking about would be authorized under something else.
So it could be state, it could be federal.
Yes.
But really, the goal is that the river just reaches a certain height or a certain flowing north.
Both. And
Could you repeat the question?
so the ultimate impact, he asked, is it the goal to design to a discharge or to a stage, or is that
To stage or flow?
flow?
Is the
Yeah,
goal. You said both.
right. It's really both. We have a discharge, and we produce a flow line from that, and the flow line is the resulting stage from that flow. Okay, so when I say we go back and look at it, we kept the flow the same. All right, in '73 we kept the flow the same, but we looked at, did that stage change with that flow that stayed the same? Does that make?
That leads me to my next question.
Okay.
You might repeat it for everybody, but in the comprehensive plan study, there was a goal there in the study not to have but a certain stage at St. Louis.
Right.
I see a lot of similarity between that and what you do at New Orleans. Is that a fair comparison?
So the question is, the comprehensive plan looked at a stage to design to,
At
right?
St. Louis
At St. Louis,
versus you look at a stage in North.
right?
Is that a fair comparison?
Yes, because we look at both. I guess just like New Orleans, I mentioned the piping diagram is a discharge, but the stage is 17, so we know what that discharge produces that stage, and so we're looking at both.
Is it reasonable then to say a plan to regulate the Mississippi River based on conditions at St. Louis? Is that a reasonable approach?
Yes, without a doubt. I mean, stage is the ultimate thing that you're looking at.
In 2011, the Birds Point to Madrid floodway was not operated per the operation plan. Part of that was because of concerns by the impacted owners within that floodway, where maybe grandpa was compensated for that floodway when it was developed, after the 1927 flood, and now the grandson owns that property and is trying to make a living on that property. Do you have similar situations in other floodways along the system, or is that unique to that particular floodway?
I would say no. The Morganza, same type of issues. I'll use just an example, environmental issue. The 2015-16, that was a winter flood. The habitat of bears, where they bear their young, that time of year was a big issue. Do we open that, given enough lead time? So, no, those issues are on all floodways. Does that get at what you? So, no, it's definitely not unique to Birds Point and Madrid.
Well, it continues to be, I think the next time we have that kind of a stage, it seems like that same issue is gonna be there. We had to go to federal court to resolve that as opposed to the Corps simply following their own operation plan to operate that floodway. And so I'm just trying to get a sense of, is that the way we're gonna have to do business every time, or do we have to go to federal court every time to force that because of those issues? Or is the Corps, trying to deal with those issues and saying, no, we've got this operation plan, that's the way we go? And I was curious as to how that played out in the rest of the system, or if it was unique to the one that's closest and nearest our heart.
Right. No. I mean, we have an operation plan that we feel like that is there, that we operate by, but to think that there will not be opposition when those structures come into play to need to be operated, they will. And Morganza is the same way. They have landowners that have property, that farm in that area, and it's an impact when it operates. So there will always be opposition to that.